Hello folks, my name is Mark, this is UCD Videos, how you guys doing? So, She-Ra, Princess of Power Season 5 dropped on Netflix earlier this month, and I just spent the last couple of days binge watching it because it's really good. So if you haven't watched the show yet, please go watch it because it's fantastic. I'm very happy with it and the way it ended. Basically what's going on here is that Horde Prime has gotten a signal from Hordak and is coming to invade Etheria, right? So shit is hitting the fan pretty bad. The characters in this show are really well written. And I think that's because this show, unlike the other He-Man shows from the 80s and 90s, was not made to sell toys, right? So this show is like, the old shows are just basically half-hour long commercials, right? This show is all about characters and how they're written and how they interact with each other and all that stuff. And it's really good, you know. Everybody gets an arc. All of the characters get some kind of growth going in this season, and they get good conclusions to their overall story arcs. First off, we're talking about Adora, so because she's like the main character and all. And at the end of Season 4, she shatters the Sword of Protection because in order to sabotage the heart of Etheria, which will destroy the entire universe, but you can't use it without She-Ra, so she blows up the sword, she like breaks it, and then it turns out that Horde Prime can use it without She-Ra, so now that's what her main conflict is. And now she's got to do it without becoming She-Ra. And of course she turns into She-Ra, and it turns out that it's because of her emotions and stuff like that, blah blah blah. And it turns out that, you know, her main conflict here with Catra is not really so much a physical, violent hero versus villain conflict, but more of like a, how does she feel about Catra, right? And it turns out her emotions for Catra is what prevents her from turning into She-Ra. So it's really cool, and you know, they kind of build on that, because throughout the entire show, you know, there's always been this sort of tension going back and forth between Adora and Catra, and here it kind of comes to a head. So that's basically what, you know, her conclusion to that arc is very good. Speaking of Catra, you know, Catra kind of steals the show in this season, right? And this is all about her redemption. So Catra was kind of sort of like the secondary villain, but kind of sort of the main villain throughout the whole thing, you know. At one point she kind of takes over leadership of the evil Horde from Hordak and stuff like that. And at the end of Season 4, she's sucking up to Horde Prime, right? Her entire thing is all about feeling worthy, you know, because throughout the entire series, it's like she's very jealous of Adora's, like, you know, ability to advance, right? And also jealous of Adora's, like, relationship with Shadow Weaver. And it's implied that Shadow Weaver and Catra, like, there was some abusive shit going on there, you know? So they kind of form this very, like, dysfunctional family dynamic, you know, of Shadow Weaver as, like, a parent figure, and then Adora is, like, her big sister that she looks up to, but, you know, is very jealous of at the same time, but is also in love with, right? More on that in a second. So, you know, all of this kind of comes through to where she's basically, at the beginning of Season 5, she's sucking up to Horde Prime, right? And it turns out that Horde Prime is just gonna just blow up Etheria and say, fuck all of this noise, I don't need any of this shit, let's just waste the entire planet. That's when Catra kind of starts making her, you know, heel face turn, right? That's what they call in wrestling, when the bad guy wrestler turns into a good guy, becomes a hero, you know, like, that's what they call that, the heel face turn, right? And so you start getting that feeling, it's like, oh, okay, so she didn't really want to kill Adora this whole time. She didn't really want to destroy anybody, she didn't want to kill anyone. She was just trying to prove to them that she was worth something, you know, by using force, by using, you know, negative attention. And it's very much what you would get from children who come from abusive households, right? They act out sometimes, and it's because they don't get that positive reinforcement, so they make do with the negative reinforcement. And that's sort of what Catra's story arc through the entire series has been, right? So this time it's like, oh, all of a sudden, like, the stakes are for real, you know, Horde Prime is going to kill everyone. It's not just going to be like, you won't be able to just capture them and gloat to them or whatever. He's gonna kill them, and then suddenly she starts turning around there, and the way that starts is in the early episodes when Glimmer has been captured by Horde Prime. She kind of becomes a substitute for Adora almost. Catra kind of realizes like, hey, maybe I've been like batting for the wrong team here, in more ways than one, right? So she eventually kind of, switches to the good side, and then it's very funny. There's a scene where Shadow Weaver and Adora and Catra are all together again, and it's just like way back in season 1, and they go through that whole dynamic all over again, and Catra gets jealous of Shadow Weaver praising Adora for stuff, and it's like, it kind of shows that things don't just change overnight. And one of the things that you have to do is, especially when you're dealing with relationship dynamics, is you have to be honest and open and ask for help. And ultimately, Catra decides to ask for help. And that's how she, redeems herself. And so that it was actually really good there. The other people also get, pretty good story arcs too. Glimmer kind of gets one with Bow because, Glimmer is sort of kind of halfway to blame for the situation that everybody's in as well. At the end of season 4, she purposely goes off on her own and doesn't listen or even confer with her friends on what she's going to do, and ultimately ends up making the situation worse by activating, balancing Etheria and activating the heart of Etheria and all this other shit. Stuff where that kind of trope where you're sort of too right to explain. That's what happens in season 4. And in this one, she has to kind of deal with that. And so what it is that there's this tension between her and Bow because she's obviously in love with Bow. That's something we've known from early on in the show, even from all the way back from the Princess Prom episode where she's all jealous when Bow's hanging out with Perfuma and shit. And, Bow doesn't really forgive her right away. And that's actually kind of realistic, when you hurt somebody emotionally, they don't just instantly give up and say, okay, it's fine, whatever, And that's kind of cool about this one is that, this show, actions have consequences in this show, right? So it takes a couple of episodes for Bow to kind of forgive her, to grow back and be like, okay, it's cool. You pissed me off, but I'm okay with it, right? And that was actually kind of cool. It's actually very realistic. It's people don't just automatically forgive you when you fuck them up, right? So that was really cool. So she gets, and her arc is all about learning to be a leader and learning how to trust people. And, part of being a leader is not doing everything by yourself, but learning how to delegate and trust your friends and that kind of shit, right? So that was cool. Scorpia gets the best arc of all the minor characters. Her whole thing is that, she's just this dumb muscle and she has zero confidence in herself, right? And she actually gets an episode where she gets to sing, and there's this part where they're in this sort of underwater nightclub, which is really cool. And Scorpia does this kind of 1940s style singing number, and it was actually really, really awesome to kind of show okay, even this minor character has some growth and some range, So that was pretty awesome. Even Hordak gets a little bit of growth going there a little bit, they don't really focus so much on Hordak because the main villain is Horde Prime, but even Hordak kind of realizes hey, I made something of myself. I'm not just a shadow of this other person, I'm my own person, right? So that was kind of cool. And he revolts against Horde Prime and stuff. Horde Prime is obviously probably the best villain so far in He-Man canon, right? In all of the prior shows put together, Horde Prime is awesome as hell. He's truly insidious and truly evil. It's he's sort of this being that's cloning himself over and over through the centuries, and so you don't know how old he is, and he kind of lets on that he's thousands or possibly tens of thousands of years old and stuff. And it was a really good characterization because if you remember in the old Filmation She-Ra cartoon, Horde Prime doesn't have any backstory at all. all they really show is like these eyes behind this sort of magical cloud of energy, and then like this robot hand that comes out, and he's just kind of like Hordak's boss in the old Filmation thing. Like, you never see him, they never talk about him, you know, he never gets a backstory or any real characterization beyond I'm just evil. And he's kind of like the Claw in Inspector Gadget, you know, just there to be somebody to yell at Hordak, right? And in this one, they really kind of push it, you know, and they really make it like evil as hell. You know, he's like mind controlling people and shit, and putting like chips in the back of their necks and like jumping into their bodies. Like at one point, he mind controls Catra, turns her into like this like slave. It's like really, really good. So yeah, you don't feel, you feel definitely like, okay, he gets what he deserves, right? Shadow Weaver ultimately dies as well. Spoilers, by the way. And, but she gets redeemed too, and her whole thing through the entire series is that she's like this abusive mother figure. But the thing is, if upon second watching, like, Shadow Weaver is kind of right about a lot of things, right? She's very correct in the judgments she makes. Like there's a part where they're all together and she's saying, she goes to Adora and she says, your feelings for Catra is what's preventing you from transforming. You should get rid of her, and she's correct. But the thing is her execution is incorrect. Instead of saying get rid of her, what really she needed to do was embrace her, and that was how she was able to transform, right? So it's like you can kind of put like Shadow Weaver in as like the abusive parent who gets mad at like their daughter for coming out as gay, right? That's kind of like, what the symbolism is there. That's the symbolism for in the show, right? She does get redeemed and ultimately sacrifices herself to save everybody. And, I really think that character in the fandom, at least, is getting a lot of shit for, like, because it's an obvious stand-in for an abusive parent. But if you like watch the series and you watch what she actually says, like she's like correct. Like she's actually very correct when it comes to identifying the situation and what needs to be done. She's just incorrect in like her assessment of people and how to go about like and what to do about it. You know what I'm saying? Like she's like the angry parent that you don't want to listen to, but who actually does have good advice to say. So anyway, but she dies, but she gets redeemed, so that's kind of cool. So overall, I really like the show. There were some things that I would have changed. Main thing is I probably would have killed off Catra. Like if I was writing it personally, I think Catra should have died. And Catra doesn't ultimately die. She ultimately lives, and her and Adora go off and, do their thing. The thing is that Catra throughout the entire series is like really bad. She's like sacking cities and like burning people's houses down and like trying to kill people, shit like that. Ultimately, she almost destroys the entire freaking world. She almost kills everybody. And she's the entire reason that Horde Prime shows up in the first place. And they kind of just forgive her, like, immediately. And it's just sort of like, what? Like, and, they even kind of poke fun at that a little bit. Because there's, like, a couple of scenes where Catra comes back and the other princesses see her. And they go, hey, it's Catra, get her! And then Adora goes, no, she's on our side. And there's, like, a part where the, what's her name? The Ice Princess, I can't remember her name, like, punches her in the face. Right, and they're kind of poking fun at the fact that Catra did this heel face turn, and then everybody's just cool with it immediately. And it's like, no, if they're not going to kill her, they should have, they should have ended this series with her going to prison or something, or being held on, going trial, or something like that, getting locked in a dungeon, or saying some shit like, okay, well, I'll be here for you when you get out, or something. You know what I mean? And they still could have ended up together, but it just seems like they forgave her way too fast, and so I really wouldn't have done that. But ultimately, I think it actually does end really well for them. Catra goes through a lot of emotional turmoil and blah, 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 shit like that. So So you really do feel for the character, you know, that's one thing I can say. So getting to the end, you know, all those ships that everybody was shipping, they all sail. At the end of the series, Catcher and She-Ra get together and ultimately kiss, which was like, you know, we all knew it was going to happen, you know. I mean, ever since the first season where they had the Princess Prom episode and they're like dancing and she like dips her, and you know, there's always been that sort of tension going back and forth, but then it was really kind of Adora who really wasn't on board with it through the whole thing. Like Adora was the one who was like confused and stuff, you know. So yeah, we all knew that was coming. So that was actually kind of cool, you know, that they actually did it. Glimmer and Bow end up together, which was kind of cool because like Glimmer, since the beginning of the series, was obviously in love with Bow, right? But Bow had something going on with like Perfuma and shit, and like they didn't really, you know, and then they didn't really kind of show anything. It's like, well, is Bow gay or whatever? I mean, he certainly like could dress the part, right? So it kind of turns out Bow's not gay. Man, what can you say, right? The other thing is Natasa and Spinnerella, like, they straight out say that they're married in this season, which is really cool because in the other seasons they just sort of implied it. You know, they had them always hanging out with each other and they would like, you know, be together, but they never showed them like kissing or anything, right? And, you know, it was like they kind of had to dance around it in like seasons like 2, 3, and 4. And in this one, they straight out say, okay, we're married, right? And then they actually show them kissing and stuff. And so that was really cool. It was just sort of like a big middle finger to the, you know, anti-like gay bigoted people out there who were talking so much shit about this show when it first came out, you know. So that was actually kind of awesome. The fact that they weren't afraid, you know, they weren't like pussyfooting around the issue anymore. And probably because this is the last season, so they figured, you know, let's just do it. Right. So that was actually it was really cool that they just took that additional step and, you know, screw the haters, right? So that's great. So, you know, I really liked it. I really liked this show. It's the best one out of, you know, I'm not afraid to say that because as you can see, I'm like a massive Masters of the Universe fan. I mean, you could see all my toys and figures here. I got my classics. I got these are my, you know, new ones. These are the old school ones from the 80s down here. So like, you know, I'm all into this shit, right? And I can say that this is the best one, the best cartoon out of all of the cartoons, the 2 Filmation ones and New Adventures, and even 2000X. Even I'd say this is better than 2000X for sure, and it's definitely worth a watch. You know, I really am kind of sad to see it go. You know, I think they probably could have like made it go for another, you know, 3 or 4 seasons at least. There were a lot of characters I really wanted to see that got a little bit of screen time in this one, you know, like things like the Star Sisters, for example, you know, or Peekaboo, you know, they actually gender bent Peekaboo, that was kind of cool. But, you know, they didn't actually really show those characters, right? And, you know, there were also a lot of other things that they kind of didn't really explain. Like, they don't really explain, you know, the first one's connection to Eternia or what Grayskull actually means, you know, like they drop a line about Grayskull, but they don't really explain, like, why does She-Ra have to say the honor of Grayskull and stuff like that in order to activate the power, you know, blah, blah, blah. So there really was a lot to go that they could have gone into that they didn't get to. And so I really think that maybe they had to end it a little early because of the, you know, Kevin Smith's Masters of the Universe cartoon that's coming later this year, maybe. Maybe that might be a reason, I don't know. I really hope one day they pick it back up, whether it's through another season or whether it's from, you know, comics or something, you know, or some other form. I hope that it continues in some form because I think there was a lot to go that they could have, a lot more story that they could have got out of it. So anyway, it's really good and everybody should go watch it. That's all I got, folks. Adios.